Yes, Soumendra.
Yeah.
So can you say it again?
No, I want to we discussed about using the use reducer hook yesterday. So I just wanted to see were you able to implement it in your counter application?
I implemented use effect and use state only. I didn't do use reducer yet.
Okay, how did you implement can you show your code?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay.
Use state model, whatever you said, I already did it. This is another one.
Mm-hmm.
So if I click here, it is supposed to count how many times I click it. And but here I'm getting mistake like one new message, like it's supposed to come 2 messages, 3 messages like that, but it is coming one.
Okay, can you go back to your code where you have implemented this part? Okay, dear, set count as count plus 1. No, no, where are you using where in the J6 you are rendering that count? I mean, so since this count comes up, right, you must be returning it somewhere, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so when you click on, you are clicking, I think, on the set use state message, that button.
Yes, set use state only. Use effect, I didn't use it yet. It is, I'm still on the work. Still I'm working.
No, I mean, so you are, okay, can you give me the control?
Yes.
So after saying that you have received, then some function is coming here. Why?
Yeah, I don't know. Even I didn't mention that one function native code. I didn't mention it. I don't know from where it is coming.
Okay, so that might be the reason. Is count. Okay. Okay. So no, you want to. Yeah. So all you have to do is just put a 0 here.
Oh, I mentioned 2 times.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so and your use effect might, I think you may see it in the networks. See, the API is getting called. It's getting called on the component coming up. So, okay. And this is use effect. Try to implement the digital clock with use effect and get some more idea, because there you will have to, here you are passing count in the dependency array. So what you're saying is like every time the count is changing, like every time you're setting the count, this use effect will get called, which means your API call will happen. That's why in the network tab, you can see so many times these calls happen. Okay, anyways, so yeah, if you implement the digital clock example, you get a better idea of how
See
you
here,
can.
digital clock also I'm doing
I
it.
don't do like that. Hour,
Yeah, not
minutes, and seconds.
yeah.
So try, like, since they are all interconnected, just convert one to another.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so for you, I think use reducer is still pending. Okay, let's move to the next person. Sheetal, can you come up with your code?
Sorry, Samal. Today I'm not with my laptop. I'll show you in tomorrow's or tomorrow before the class.
Okay, then we come to Sadika. Sadika, can you show yours?
Yeah, Sumindra, but I worked only on use state. I'll show
Only
you.
on use state.
Yeah,
Okay, so you are like 2 sections back, and I think
because I
Java
felt
one
like
session.
I felt like I need to still work on this one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but the issue here, I have a doubt. I'll show. This is the output I got. So without, if I give, one second. So if I'm giving some number here, it is incrementing and decrementing. But if I don't give, oh, 1 second, I'll show. Even if I'm not giving any other number, it is taking the previous number here.
Yeah, that's because that's the last number that's available in the state. You might not have cleared your state. So basically what you need to do is like, the expected behavior is like, when you enter some number in the input box and then click on increment or whatever operation, then it should use that number and increment it. And if there's no number in the input box, then it should, what it should do?
It should clear, right?
Yeah, if there's no number here, then what it should do?
It should not, I mean, if I'm not giving any number, it shouldn't represent, I mean, it shouldn't get calculated with any of these four.
Yeah, okay. So I should like your output should return to 0, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So come back to your code. Give me the control.
Okay.
So on the click of a button, you are doing all those things using count. Okay, and this is your input. And so what happens is, so one thing if you can do here is like, okay, wait. So whatever number you are giving here in the input text, it's taking that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, you have a Mac.
Yes.
Okay, then I have to use Windows tab. And let's give, let's say 5. Okay.
Let's refresh that and try it.
Why an increment by 5 it comes 4? Then now it's taking 8, like 1 less.
I have given increment by 4 with any other number. So it probably, oh yeah. So if you are giving 5 and then 4, count of 4, count plus 4, right? So that is the reason it's showing 8.
Okay, so it's not really connected. Okay. Right. Okay. Let me give. Yeah. So yeah, so we were so one thing that you are doing incorrect here is like if you have let's say that you have a input box. Okay, then whatever you want to put in the input box, you want to add, delete, or multiply or divide from the last result that we get. Right. So I think the best way to do it is to essentially initialize the count to 0, and then on the input box you should probably use an on change method. So something like this, on change, and here you have to pass the function that you want to like receive, that you want to call every time the function changes. So
Okay.
maybe you can write it as like handle input. Handle input as e. Then you need to define that function here. Then you define another state. So here you are going to event dot target dot value is going to fetch you that integer. So what you have to do is like you have to set the current input to that value. So what you need to do here is yeah. So the current input as, but okay, wait, this will be in the form of a string. So the first thing that you need to do is to convert it into an integer. So
Why will that be a string, Somendra?
yeah, because that's basically the default form of in the input box. Yeah. So the number should be %, and pass to it event dot target dot value. And then we can set this to the current input. And that's all. Now, so every time this changes, our input handle input will essentially call this method and it will change. So every time, so whatever the count is right now, we want to change it with the current count. So instead of 4, we can use the current input. But first, let's check if the input is coming to be, if the input is coming to be correct. So let's use the use effect hook here. Okay. Yeah, so this is just for debugging purposes. Like, since we know that in the use effect, whatever we pass in the dependency array, if it changes, the use effect gets fired. So let's see if the current input is changing according to how we want it to change first. And if it changes that way, then we can simply use it there. So let's save this. We are using Mac. Save it here. Let's start. Okay, is it running already? Okay. Let's move back here. And let's inspect the element. Yeah. Now let's say we have one here. So yeah, you can see if I press 2, then if I press 3, then the number gets updated. If I remove all the numbers, then it becomes nan. Okay. So that's fine. We don't need use effect. This was only for debugging purpose. So yeah, now, so one thing is like if there's no input, then it will be nan. So we should set that also, check that also. If, sorry, number nan, then set the current input to 0, or else set it to the original. Okay. So that's it. Now let's come back to our code and just change the whatever count we are giving here. This should be current input.
I felt the issue was only with multiply and division.
I'm sorry, what was it?
I felt the issue was with multiply and division.
Only with multiply and division?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, actually, I was trying to make the code a little more generic. With +4 and -4 is like, that's fine. So like the idea now is that whatever input we give to the input box, it will use okay, sorry, this should not be like this. Okay. 50 is okay. Now I should click. Let's come back here. So let's say that I wrote here 4. So basically I want to increment this 0 by 4. So if I click on increment now, yeah, it gets incremented by 4. Now if I write 1, so basically last output is 4. I want to decrement the value by 1. If I write 1 and decrement it, it should decrement by 1. Now let's say I want to multiply this 3 by 15. Yeah, okay, maybe 15. So if I click on multiply, yeah, I'm sorry. I click multiple times. Anyways, so it multiplies by 15, and let's say if I want to divide now by 15, then we click on divide. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you got that, right? What we
Yeah.
did?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's all. So I think you are currently on the use state. You have not used the use effect. And there are some other hooks also, like use ref that we were discussing last time. So yeah. Anyway, so you can try to catch up. And if let's see, like what's the expectation that what will you do in your next session? Because the thing is, I want to get started with you guys, the POC for e-commerce app. So until unless you are clear with all the hooks and something called Redux Dev Tools and the API calls.
You can start that, Somendra, because see however we need to work on this anyway, because it's getting complicated day by day. So it takes time for us.
Yeah.
So you keep on, I mean, you start doing whatever you wanted to train us on, and we'll try to cope up with you.
Okay. Yeah, so that's fine. Let's move on to Radhika. Can you present your work?
Somendra, can you give me 20 minutes? My friend is attending an interview from my laptop. I'm attending this class from phone.
Yeah,
I will
okay.
submit.
Yeah, no issues. So let's come to Divya. Divya, can you present your work?
Somendra, I don't have my laptop with me. Can I show it to you tomorrow?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I think did I ask you like you are the one who told like the laptop was not there. Did I ask you earlier also?
No, it
Or
was me.
okay, so there are like 2 people who don't have the laptop right now.
No.
Yes, Somendra.
Okay, who Divya and Sheetal.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, okay. Divya and Sheetal. Okay, fine. And about and I think I saw it from Sadika and Swapna, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I will show you tomorrow at the beginning of the class, Somendra.
Okay.
Yeah, I have done major part, but just I'll show you tomorrow.
Okay. So let me present my screen. Yeah, okay. So let me present my screen. What was that for us? Yeah, introduction to API calls and global state management. Okay, we will not do use callback and use memo right now because you are still going on with use reducer. So so I'll wait for you to completely absorb and be comfortable with the hooks that we have already discussed. Once that is done, we will continue with the use callback and use memo. And these are like these both of use callback and memo are memoization based hooks. Like if you have heard about lazy loading, so lazy loading in React is a concept where something is not loaded until unless it's absolutely required. Because let's say that if you are like on a web page and that web page has got several images, then what happens is uh, so once you load that page, then unnecessarily so many different images might get loaded. Okay, even though you don't require to see all those images, maybe you just need the form to fill up, right? But just because there are so many images on the page, it just keeps on, it just loads. So that kind of affects the performance of your page. So we can actually write code in a certain way. If that is what's happening, then we can write the code in a certain way that the images gets downloaded, or the images gets loaded only when a user scrolls to that particular section. Okay, until unless it does not scroll to that section or does not kind of loads that component, that image does not get loaded. That's what we call lazy loading. And this is just like one example. Excuse me. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, so I was talking about use callback and use memo. They are like memoization techniques. So if you don't want the performance of your application to degrade at a certain point just because you have to load a certain thing, and then in that case, you use callback. There's one thing that we call referential equality. I'll talk about it. Okay, let me give you some background of it, and we will implement it when we'll do the use callback. So let's say that you have a JSX where you are rendering two components. Okay, maybe not two components. Let's say one component, and then there's like some JSX involved there. So and that particular component, you are passing like 2 attributes to it. Now the expectation is that until unless the attributes change, so let's say that you are passing, one is like a variable that you are, yeah, so once let's say that one of the attribute that you are passing is a variable and the other attribute that you are passing is a function. Okay, and now you might expect that until unless that the variable changes, your JSX do not get re-rendered. But that's not exactly what happens. If you see that every time you update the state or every time your component gets re-rendered, then it again renders that component, the child component. Okay, and that's because when a component gets re-rendered, the function gets recreated, and that's because, and due to this referential equality, that's why it gets re-rendered. So in order to prevent these kind of situations, we use a use callback hook. Now if you have this kind of situation happening in your React app, it does not really cause any kind of trouble. Like your app will work fine, but it will lead to performance degradation, like because it's not the correct way that the component gets re-rendered again and again unnecessarily. So in order to prevent that, we use the use callback hook. And the second one is the use memo. Use memo also acts the same way. It just memoizes whatever you want. Like for example, if you're trying to execute a function from within the JSX, then you know that that function is going to execute every time. That function is going to execute every time you essentially update your component. So in those kind of scenarios, yeah, so in those kind of scenario, you use the use memo hook so that you memorize that the values, or in simpler terms, you cache the values of that particular function so that it does not get um, re-rendered again and again, or like recalculated or recalled, whatever, again and again. So that's just we will see when we will implement these two hooks at that point of time. When I'll give you the example, it will be more clear. For now, let's shift our attention to API calls and global state management. So since you did not use the use reducer hook, I think none of you have used it so far. So I will not start with the Redux dev tools today. Okay. So this is something that we need to do. Redux dev tools. I'll talk about it later on, but let's first dive into the brownfield kind of project. So I like explain to you about brownfield and greenfield. So in the brownfield applications, you will find this Redux dev tools there. Let's move to. So I was referring to the checked in. Yeah, this one. Yeah. So let's start. Yeah. So as I said, I was mentioning to you last day about, I don't think I have that paint diagram today. I think, yeah, okay, I have it. Yeah. So I was talking about this use reducer hook. Sorry. And while doing that, I was talking about the how global state manages most of the problems, and how the action creators and how they work. So we will actually, and the kind of implementation that we saw that day was a more of a local implementation, and that's not a global state basically, but just to like clarify the logic for the state update, we were using that particular way. Now let's shift our attention. Okay, there's one more thing. I think Alok, are you there in the call?
Yes, Director.
Yeah. So yesterday you asked me a question like what happens like if we use two states, right? And how to use two states within a single reducer, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I thought about it. Okay. And that's so I'll tell you a little bit about it today. Let me find out the code where it is.
Okay.
Um, yeah. Here it is. So see. Yeah, so here you had the one initial state, and if you want to use two states, now the question arises is like, if the two states are independent of one another or the two states are dependent on one another. Okay, by that, I mean that if the states are like the update logic for the states are the same or the update logic for the states are different. Let's say that the update logic for both the states are interdependent to one another in the sense that, an update to some key in one of the state also updates the key in another state. If that is the case, then one thing that we can do is to essentially do something like this. State 2. And here we have like two states, and inside this we can define the keys that we want. Okay, so this, and then we can use this reducer to update this state. Okay, now so basically we are creating two states within the same state. And if the two states are independent of one another, like the update logic for the two states are independent, then what we can do is we can create, you can then create let's go up. Yeah, you can create another state, let's say state 2. Okay, and you create another reducer for it. Okay. You create another reducer for it and use that reducer to update that state. I mean, the basic design thinking, when we come to design thinking, is basically, it basically stands for the principle that one reducer should be used to update one state only. Okay, because if you update multiple states using a single reducer, then it beats the purpose of having a reducer itself. The reducer actually, kind of highlights the underlying logic with which you are updating the state. So obviously, if you update multiple states together, then it will lead to like a complete mess. So yeah, if you have like two states and if they have like intertwined update logic, then you can do like that. Like you can, within a one state, you can keep those two states. Or if you have like, if the two states are independent of each other, then you can use two different reducers for two different states. So Alok, was that clear? Alok, are you there?
Yeah, Somendra.
Okay, so that was clear, right?
Yeah, Somendra.
Yeah, okay. Now let's move back to our this code. Right. So this is like the example that we saw earlier that only deals with the local state. Okay. And the reducer we were using there just to like what you can say, like write the underlying state update logic in a much more better way. Okay. But now what we are going to do is like we are going to but now we are actually going to deep dive into the real of how to actually create a real global state. Okay. So if you want to create, so this is a brownfield project. If you today, like if you have an app today, if you write, I'll show you where it's deprecated. Yeah, but anyways, if you want to the first thing that you have to do is like import this provider from React Redux and wrap your app component that you are rendering with this provider. To this provider, you have to provide an attribute called store. Okay. Now, what is this store? So this store is essentially the global bucket that I was talking about last time, that you have this global bucket where you store all the things. That's what we call store. The store, as you can see here, is imported from a store directory. So let's see what's there in the store directory. In the store directory, you have this index.txt, and you can see that it's exporting store, export constant store from here. So what it's exporting is like, it's exporting a store object. This store object it gets by calling this create store method. This is actually imported from Redux. Okay, so to this create store method, you have to pass the reducer and you have to pass the initial state. Just like in the use reducer hook, we were passing the reducer and initial state. Here also you have to pass the reducer and initial state to the create store, which we are importing from Redux. But as I said that this is a brownfield project. So what I mean is that if you go to package.json, in here, if you come to Redux, okay, this one. So if you see that a version is 4.2.0, but if you if you install any latest version of Redux, then after installing that version, if you go and write here import create store from Redux, it will tell you that this create store method is deprecated. Okay, so this is not used anymore. Instead, what we use is Redux DevTools. So that I will discuss later. But if you fall across a brownfield project, then you will see this used very, very often. So what this create store does is like it creates a store for you where you have to pass the reducer and initial state. So this is the reducer file. This is where we are exporting the reducer. And this is all the things in the reducer. These are the update logic that we have written. It's yeah, the reducer is large because there are lots of events that are happening. Yeah, I'll tell you how it happens. Okay, but for the time being, this is the reducer, and within the reducer only there is this initial state also that we are exporting. So in the index.ts, you import the reducer and initial state and pass it on to the create store method, which will create a store and then return it. So you will get it in the store variable and you export it. So this store is something that in the index.tsx, you have to provide it in the as an attribute to the provider component. This provider is basically a higher order component that you import from React Redux. Now let's come to the crux of like what's happening. The first thing is action types. So always when you work with global stores, always, and if you are like in a brownfield project, then always create the structure in this way. The first thing that you should do is like create a constant file called action types, which will enlist all the different kind of events that can happen in your, for example, this is an e-commerce app. So you can add a product, you can edit a product, delete a product, you can add to cart, you can add to wish list, you can set the products, you can open cart dialog, or so these are like all the different kind of events or that can happen in your app. Okay, now these are like, as I said, these are like events, so you can think of it as different action, different types of action that can happen. The second thing is the actions. So this actions folder essentially creates the action for you. For example, if you want to add to cart, okay, then you have to like, you have to just like call this function and pass what product you want to add to this cart. Okay, so this product, so what it will do is that it will return an object which will have the type as add to cart and the payload as product. Okay, so if you remember in the use reducer hook, I showed you like how to use the type and payload. So similarly, if you go to here reducer, you will see that at there you will have like add to cart, add product. Let me search add to, yeah, this one, add to cart. So as you can see that in the return, it destructures the state, and in the cart products, it sets the cart products, whatever is there. Along with that, it sets the action.payload, like whatever the product that was passed here, it is also setting that here. Okay, so this is what happens in reducer. So what action does is that it creates an action for you, and then you have to pass, using that action, you can call the reducer. Okay, now where this action is used and how to use this action, let me show you that also. Yeah. Yeah. So this is not here. Yeah. We'll see here. Yeah. So these are the, so in the props, you have this add to cart passed in. Then once it is there, you can actually call the add to cart from anywhere. Okay, so like for this button, we are calling this add to cart method. When you click on this button, this on click method, so we are calling this add to cart and we are passing the product to it. Okay, Yeah. So yeah, so on the on-click method, we are calling this add to cart and passing the product to it. Now you might wonder, that how did this function get passed in the props, like for this home page, are we like passing it from the higher component, or is it like that? So the answer is no. Basically we are using something called connect. Okay. uh, so connect is something that you import from React Redux, and what connect does is that it connects your component to the global state. Yeah, so if you scroll down to the bottom, you will see that there are like two functions defined here. One is map state to props. Okay, the name itself is kind of might suggest you something, which is like like map the whatever the state is there, map it to the props. Okay, and that's how you get the state. And from there you can actually, since we only want to use the product list here, so we just get the state dot product list. So this product list actually gets mapped to the props for this component. So you will see that here you will have imported, see, product list. So this product list is coming from the global state. Okay. And then you have map dispatch to props, wherein you have to like pass the dispatch method. You don't have to actually pass this. The connect method does it for you. It will pass the dispatch method, and to that, and then you can use. So these are like the functions that you have, and you can use. So this is something that you have to import, like from the actions. If you see add to cart imported here. Add to cart, see store and actions. So that is the function that we are talking about, is imported here, since as I said that you can dispatch an action, so you can call a dispatch on this particular action and you pass the product to it. So that's how it works. And at the end of it, or at the end of like all of it, you have to use the connect method to connect the state to the dispatch. Okay. So this is like the flow of how Redux works, and how you can use the global state. I know it is a little bit confusing, but I can't give you a demo right now for this, because let me see. This was the Redux version of. Okay, let me see if I can use something. Okay, I don't think it's gonna work like that. Okay. Anyways, I'll try to give this Redux demo. Actually, it's not required. I mean, it's just for your knowledge, since this is a brownfield application. These days, we use the Redux dev tools, so we will use that only, right? We will not use this particular way of doing it. Okay, but even if you require it, you can either refer to the flow that I've discussed, or if you still have any issues, you can always come back to me and I will debug it for you if you face any issues implementing Redux. But I think right now your focus should be on the, I mean, right now your focus should be on what I was saying. Uh, yeah, your focus should be on using the use reducer hook, because that kind of explains a lot. Let's come back here and just refresh this. I can give you some example of Axios. So that this is like introduction to the global state management. Let's talk about the API calls and how the API calls happens in React. So this might be a little bit simple for you. This is very close to what we discussed with fetch only. Yeah. Okay, so we just need to install Axios. So if you remember the last time I told you that we generally, for API calls, there is a method called fetch, but we don't use that method. We use Axios instead of that. So just give you an example of how it works, and then I'll show you some advanced versions of that. Quote Axios. Yes. And let's say we import a use reference. Okay, so we have Axios dot. Now you can see what methods you can do. Axios dot get, head, length, all these things. So for the time in, we'll use get. Okay, and we will have to pass. So see here the definition. You have the URL, you have the config, okay, and you have the promise. I mean, it returns promise. Yeah, so we'll talk about this in a little bit greater length. First, let's do a very simple API call. Let's get some fake API to call first. So this is like one. Okay. Maybe we can try to get posts. Like this one. So this is the API that we are calling, and then since it returns a promise, we call the then method on it. Sorry. Then we return response dot JSON, and then we call the then method over it again, and we kind of get the response, and we console log the response. And if there's any error, we also can catch that. Since it is a promise, it returns a promise. The rest of the things will be same as we saw in the fetch method, like how we were using the fetch method. So these are the common functions that you can call on a promise. So yeah, so this is all. Now let's save this and see if this works. Okay, it seems like it may not. Okay, let's come back to our then code itself. We will do it. This is something that we can do within our project itself. So the first thing that you need to do is to install Axios. For that, you need to run npm install Axios. Okay, if no get installed, I have to disconnect my VPN. We do that. Suspend. So it got installed. So anyways, let's come back to our index.js first. Let's see. So we are just the use effect. And to the dependency array, we don't pass anything. In this we pass the and then get the response. Sorry. Return answer listen then all the JSON. Okay, I think don't require this one here. Yeah, the response to data. Yeah. So as you can see in the, if you go to the network, you will see that there is this call get call through which you get all this data, and these are the data that you got. So it contains user ID, title, body, all these things. So this is like how Axios works. Okay, but as you can see, like as I said that we use Axios for our anything that's related to industry. We don't use Fetch that much, and you can directly, even though you don't know much about Axios, you can already see why that is the case. Like we have to write one then less in comparison to Axios. Sorry, in comparison to Fetch. When we are using Fetch, we had to like transform the data to JSON and then pass it along. Right now we don't have to do that. Now remember one thing, this is a very common mistake I see people doing, which is like what they do is like in here where I'm console logging, what they do is like return return the response. Okay, they do something like return response and then they attach it to a variable like API response. Okay, they do something like that and they expect that since this then method is returning the response, then this API response variable should get this response, right? So let's console log and see if we get this API response as the response that we are expecting. So we So as you can see here, this returns something called promise pending. Okay, so this is because this API response, when you call axios.get, this get function returns a promise. It does not return any value, right? So if you think that if I'll just like assign this a variable, okay, that's not going to work because this is only going to return a promise, nothing else. So and that's why in the .then call, if you, so whatever you have to do for a promise, remember you do it within the .then method, not here. Okay, so you remove it here. Okay, let's say that you want to take the response. Okay, then you create a state and update the state here. Okay, so let's so it's more like, you know, constant API response set API response equals to new state. Initially, it will contain an empty object. So in here, instead of returning the response, you set API response and you set it to response.data. Okay, and in here, you use the set API response. So this is like a better approach altogether. Okay. So this is not the better approach, this is the correct approach actually. So you can set the state from here. So once your promise resolves, then it will send. Now, if you want to use this API response, write another use effect hook wherein whenever this API response data changes, it will trigger this. So initially your API response, the state that you have set is initially initialized to an empty object. So it's not changing, so it will not call. Then if you do this axios.get, when this promise gets resolved, then it will set your API response to response.data. So this API response gets set, then this everything that is there inside this use effect will execute again. So if you want to do anything with your data, that the response you are getting, then you should do it like this. Okay, if you think that we will just assign a variable, that's not going to work because this is a promise. This is not a variable. This is not a regular like JavaScript object. Okay, that's one thing. The second thing I wanted to show you is like how to, okay, so yeah, so if you are aware like how APIs work, and then you might be aware that this is just like a kind of a toy call. This is not exactly how we generally call it. So every API has, when you, let's say if you do a post call to an API, then you have a certain body associated with it. Like you have to pass on some data to it. Okay, then you have some headers associated with an API. Okay, so all these things are there. So if you have, so this is not, so this is like a very simple example. Let me show you how you actually create an API and then you call it. Okay. So let's come back to our, you know, this product checklist checked in this project. And I'll show you how we are doing. So inside this project, you will see that there's a folder called services. Okay, and inside the services, there's a folder called product details v1. Product details v1 means that this is the version 1 of the microservices that's created. So if you come here, you'll see that the first thing that we are doing here is Axios calling axios.create. So axios.creates actually creates an API for you, which you can call. So this basically takes the URL, the parameters and the headers, whatever you want to give it. Okay, so the base URL is going to be whatever, like in this case, this is the one. In our case, the URL would have, the base URL would have been up till like this part, up till .com/. Okay, then you pass on the params to it. Okay, what if you have, like if your API has got certain parameters associated, for example, if you want to like see the response for only the stores in the US, then you can pass store.us. It depends on how your microservice is created. So whatever parameters your microservice allows you, I mean the endpoint that is created that allows you, you can actually set the parameters here, and obviously the headers here. So headers like, so in here, this is the API key and this is the host. So this is like very common thing. If you do some project there, you have to use an API key. API key is used so that we don't allow unauthorized users to call our API. So if you use, so in the headers, you have to associate the API key, and there are like many different kinds of headers that some you have to pass. So this is how you create an API. And then when you call an API, yeah, I forgot to tell you about async await. I'll tell you right now. So, so when you call an API, you see this product API list. This product list is this is our like API that Avios creates for us, and we call the get method on it, and we call the list. So as I said here in our counter example, that this is our this is our base URL, and this /post would have gone here, like post, when we put the get method here, and then we wait for the response. So so this is how it works for with use effect. We will try to convert. So we were using use effect because we wanted the call to happen as soon as the component loads. Now we don't want that. Let's say I remove all this. I want the API call to happen. Yeah, I want the API call to happen as soon as yeah, just hold on. Yeah, I want the API call to happen as soon as you click a button, let's say. So we come here and create a button. Click. Let's say we'll be calling some function, get data, let's say. And let it be click me to make API call. So if you have something like this, now, okay, let's remove this use effect for now. And we define a function called get data. Now, as we have already seen that if you use the axios.get method and pass the URL to it, okay, then you have to like call the .then, which is like to wait for it. Okay, and this is like not a very cool way to write a code. So instead, a handy way to write it would be to use the async await. So you can use this async keyword to define a function that, okay, to define a function that this is going to be like, this is going to execute in an asynchronous fashion. Like, for example, if you see here, so yeah. Was it like this? No. Okay, I think it was yeah. So this is like, so what you're saying is that this function is going to execute asynchronously. So whenever you use an async keyword on a function, you also have to use the await keyword. So what we'll do is like let response equals to await, and then we the axios call axios.get this. Okay. Then what we do, console log, not console log, we will set some state here. Set API response log. Okay. And we use the use effect hook here just to print out the data. Mhm. So let's now test this part. See how it works. Let's come back to our yeah. And click me to make an API call. This is here. Let's come back here. Yeah. So as you can see, this call happened. Let's clear this. Let's do it one more time. Okay. So yeah, see, you're getting the data here. So what? So you might wonder, like, what's the difference? So this is just for our testing purpose. This is not required. So what's the difference here? Like we use the .then method here. Here we are using something called async and await, right? So the difference is like you can actually write your code. Actually, this also does the same thing. Actions.get returns a promise only. Okay, but this await keyword makes sure that you don't go to the next line until unless this promise gets resolved. Once it's resolved, it assigns it to response, and then you can use that data to set the data. So this is what an async await does. So it does the same thing. Remember this, what async await does is just the same thing that what you can do with the promise and using the .then methods. So it just does the same thing. The only difference is that using async await, you can write your code. Although this is an asynchronous code, you can write it as if it's like synchronous, like it's working like one line after another. Okay, so this is the only difference. You can write asynchronous code in a synchronous fashion. Yeah, but what async await does internally is just the same thing. Like you have the .then method, and what .then method does, that's what does the same thing that async await also does. Okay, so this async is remember that it's a special kind of function, and this then you have this await keyword which helps you to kind of get the data and send the API response. So this is all about APIs. Like I have given you some very simple examples here, but when you will do your projects at that point of time, you will require to configure your API something like this. Okay, where you have to put the API key as headers, then you have to pass the parameters, and you have to pass the base URL and all those things. Okay, so yeah, this is one more thing I forgot to tell you about try catch. Okay. Yeah, so remember that this is like this should be inside a try block. You probably are already familiar with the try catch concept. So it should be inside a try block. Okay, it's not so if something goes wrong with this particular when fulfilling this promise, then you move to the catch block where you essentially catch the exception. Okay, guys, that's all for today. If you guys have any question, please let me know. No questions? Am I audible, guys?
Yes, Somendra.
Yes, Amindra, you are audible, but we don't have any questions right now. We'll ask tomorrow.
Okay, no issues. Yeah, so that's all for today. I think we discussed about API calls. The only thing that is required now is to, okay, one more thing, context API. So these two things more are required. And yeah, the concept of ejection and writing CSS. There are a few things in React you need to know before you start writing. Right now, I asked you to use only the app.css or style.css. Yeah, but you have to, for every component, you have to write its own CSS, and there you may have some you have to know certain things, okay, before you start writing CSS in React. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then I have to explain to you how to work with Redux DevTools, and then I'll explain to you context API. And once all these things are done, we should be able to start with our project, which would be to create an e-commerce app. Okay. Let me see if this installs. Does it already have one module? So, let me suspend. And at least I can show you, how exactly what is expected from you guys. I think it's installing. Let's give it some time. Right, so guys, you can see it here, right? This is like a very simple it's a simple app. So this was given to me as part of an assignment for one. So this was a part of live coding round where I had to create this React app. So what happens is, like, you have this add product, you have this cart, and you have this wish list. So if you go to some product like this, if you click on add to cart, then that product gets added to the cart here. Okay. So if you click on the cart, you will see that whatever the price and the product, whatever is there, you can see here. Similarly, you can add to the wish list also. So it gets added to the wish list. Okay. If you want to delete this product, then you can click on this delete icon. Or if you want to edit, then you can actually edit the details for this product from here. If you want to delete it also, you can also do that. Okay. So, and this is like a search bar here. If you, let's say if I write ASOS, okay, enter the product name or the category. So let's say is the category, we have to see the data. Just now we console log in the a category like full and beer. Okay, let's come here. Okay, I think I don't know. So maybe after a long time I ran this code. So something is happening. Okay, we don't have to. So this is like a rating, like what is the minimum price? This is a filter. Like what is the minimum price? Like what if you want to set a budget for yourself, then you can set us like the minimum is like $50 or $25. The maximum is like let's say $75. So I want something between $25 and $75. Based on that, it will filter the products. Right now you can see there are only these products. But if you remove this filter, then all the products will come. Similarly, you can filter on the rating, like rating, if you use 3, then only, rate the products with 3 rating will come. Similarly. So this filter is like a more advanced thing. Yeah, the first thing that you will do is like create this add product cart and wish list. And these filters we will see later on, like if you guys get time or if you're comfortable with all the things, then you can create. If you have like free time, then you can create this filter also if you want. Yeah. Right now, but this is like what's expected from you also when you start your, I'll give you the API details, all the details that you require for the API, like headers and everything. And you'll have to call that API and then you have to get the data and then you have to like do the work. Okay, so it's a very simple app. Like it does not contain any CSS because this was asked in the live coding round. So they did not care about the CSS. They mostly cared about the implementation. So, but if you have time, you can always add CSS to your code also. Yeah, no, but this is like not all simple CSS. If you see here, so this is like all CSS created things, like it's coming up, then it on hover the color is changing and all this. These are all CSS created things. And if you see these input boxes, if you see here in the card, these things and this card, so these are all material UI components. If you use material UI, then these are the things that you get. So not all, so these special style are using CSS, and then you have the material library also. This is very common. Like we use a mix and match of both libraries and our own CSS code. Our own CSS code to actually match the theme of the or the standards of your organization, and and this essentially to a material UI or any other library to quickly create some generic things like button and all those things. Okay, so this is what is expected. And so this is something that you may start working on once you like are comfortable with React. Okay, so I think we are still stuck with use reducer, so you guys can complete it. I'll not push. You can take your own time and absorb things and then move forward. Yeah, so that's all. Yeah. So are we good to close then today? Okay, then guys, then let's meet tomorrow.
Sure, Soumya. Thanks, Soumya.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much.